Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Welcome to today's webinar, which is entitled Health and Safety and the Employment Rights Bill, Preparing for a New Era in Health and Safety Compliance. My name is David Preston. I'm a course developer here at VinciWorks, and it is my great pleasure to be hosting this webinar. So thank you all for joining us as we explore the significant changes coming with the Employment Rights Bill in 2025 and what that means for health and safety compliance. So this new Employment Rights Bill represents one of the biggest overhauls in UK employment law in decades. It introduces a host of reforms, from guaranteeing hours for zero-hour workers to giving employees new rights from day one on the job, bolstering whistleblower protections, addressing modern issues like workplace surveillance and the right to disconnect, and setting up a powerful Fair Work agency to enforce all of these rights. So that's a lot of change, and it's going to reshape how organizations manage their people and ensure a safe and fair workplace. So today we're going to take a detailed look at some of those changes, focusing on what they mean for health and safety professionals. Often when we hear people, when people hear Employment Rights Bill, they think it's just an HR or legal issue. But in reality, many of these reforms directly impact health and safety management, things like staffing levels, training, well-being, and compliance documentation. So we'll discuss practical strategies for adapting these changes so that you can stay ahead of the curve and maintain a compliant and safe working environment. So as we go along, please definitely feel free to submit your questions anytime using the Q&A function or in the chat. We do have a team monitoring those channels, and we will try and address as many as we can. So either during the flow of our discussion as things come up, or in the Q&A segment at the end. Also, please feel free to share your thoughts or experiences in the chat. So for example, if your organization is already preparing for these changes, please let us know how. And if you, at any point, if you're interested in seeing how VinciWorks can help you with your compliance, you can write demo into the chat at any point. We also have a guide to the big issues in health and safety this year, which you can download for free now using the link that should be coming up in the chat. And so at any point during the conversation, any point during the webinar, please just write anything you want into the chat, and we're going to try and keep on top of that and address as many issues as we can. So let's get started. Joining me today is our panel of experts who will help unpack these new regulations. So first, I'm very, very pleased to welcome Sarah Henna-Dahan, our Learning and Content Manager here at VinciWorks. And Sarah works very closely on our health and safety content and has been following developments of this bill closely. So great to have you with us, Sarah Henna.
Thanks, Dave. This employment rights bill, is set to change a lot of how we approach workforce management. And I'm excited to discuss what that means for health and safety compliance. There's certainly a lot to cover today.
Absolutely. We're also joined by Naomi Grossman, who is also a learning and content manager at VinciWorks. And Naomi specializes in employment law and compliance topics and has been doing a deep analysis of this bill as well. Welcome, Naomi.
Hi, Dave. Hi, everybody on the webinar. So it's true, this bill really does intersect with health and safety in so many ways. And I'm really looking forward to exploring those connections and answering all your questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for being here. If you'll allow me, I'm just going to quickly plug a couple of webinars that we have coming up in the next couple of weeks before we dive in. So the links to register for those webinars are coming up in the chat now. We have, very quickly, Wednesday, the 7th of May, an AI compliance and ethical practices webinar. The 21st of May, also Wednesday, ergonomic essentials. So that's about mastering sitting, lifting, and posture for a safer workplace. And on May the 28th at 12 p.m. UK time is GDPR 7 years on. So if any of those seem like they might be interested, you please do click on the link, sign up, and that would be great to see you there as well. Okay, plug out of the way. Let's kick things off. So let's set the scene. The Employment Rights Bill is in its final stages in the House of Lords. The legislation will likely be passed before the summer recess, we've heard, which will start the clock, with most of the changes expected to come into effect in 2026. So right now is our window of time to prepare. Naomi, perhaps you can start by giving us an overview. What are some of the key themes of the Employment Rights Bill, and why should health and safety professionals specifically pay attention to this?
Okay, great question, and let's dive into it. So, big picture, the Employment Rights Bill is all about strengthening worker protections and modernizing the workplace, really in line with today's challenges. It covers a lot of ground, but there are a few major themes that are really important to kind of focus on. The bill will require employees to offer guaranteed hours to 0 hour and very low hour workers who've been working regular hours. And it also introduces rules for giving reasonable notice of shifts and paying compensation for last minute cancellations. So this is aimed at stopping the exploitation of people who would have insecure work schedules. And there's something else called day one rights. And many rights used to kick in only after a certain period of employment. These will come available from day one. For example, statutory sick pay from day one of an illness, which used to be only from day four, as it is now. Now it starts from day four. There's day one rights to paternity, parental, and bereavement leave. So basically, every employee will have a basic safety net of rights immediately when they start a job.
Right, so already there's a lot for us to do in making sure our internal policies and employee handbooks will be updated with these new day one rights.
Yeah, there's going to be a big and immediate change. And there's also a lot from an employment rights and compliance perspective. So the bill also boosts whistleblower protections. It clamps down on those fire and rehire tactics where employees will dismiss staff and then rehire them on less favorable terms. The bill will make these kind of dismissals automatically unfair in most cases. It also moves to establishing this kind of right to disconnect. So employees aren't obligated to engage in work communications outside of their working hours. And it looks at regulating workplace surveillance practices. And this would protect employees' privacy and prevent excessive monitoring. So these new rights also come with much stronger enforcement. The bill will create a new fair work agency that brings together enforcement of various labor standards like minimum wage, sick pay, holiday pay. And this agency will have real powers to inspect records, issue fines, and even take employers to tribunal on behalf of workers if needed. In short, there's going to be a lot more teeth to ensure that companies can comply with all these, that companies do comply with all these changes. And this is a lot for everyone here to take in, and especially everyone here, health and safety professionals. They really have to pay attention because each of these areas has an impact on workplace safety and compliance practices.
Thanks, Naomi. I mean, I think that it's obvious that some of this legislation is very positive, but also definitely will present a lot of challenges. So one other major change with the Employment Rights Bill is the expansion of sexual harassment compliance. The Worker Protection Act that came into force last year is essentially going to be superseded by the regulations on harassment in the Employment Rights Bill. It's a major change and one we won't have time to get into the detail of in the next hour, but we will be hosting future webinars on this subject and coming out with new guidance. But in the meantime, if you're looking for harassment training that will automatically be updated with the changes once they come into effect, you can write harassment into the chat. You can also download our FAQs to the Worker Protection Act and the sexual harassment compliance in general, which should be coming up in the chat about now. So Sarah Hannah, you've been studying this legislation for a while now. What is your take on being proactive, especially from the point of view of a health and safety manager?
Thanks. Great question. I'll start by saying being proactive is critical. First of all, many of the changes require new processes like tracking working hours more closely or updating training, and those can't be implemented overnight. If you suddenly have to offer guaranteed hours to a bunch of staff, you'll need systems in place to monitor that. Or if sick pay is now from day one, as it's going to be, you need a budget and plan for more people taking off when ill, which is a good thing, but needs to be planned for. So starting now gives you time to develop those practices and train your team. Second, health and safety is fundamentally about prevention. We don't want to wait for an accident to happen, but rather we want to assess the risks and act to prevent them. I see this legislation in a similar way. If we wait until 2026 when the rules are enforced, we might find ourselves scrambling, and that's when mistakes can happen or things can fall through the cracks. Now, also, early compliance can improve our safety culture. It's a good thing for employees to see that we're on top of these changes and genuinely care about implementing them. For example, if we start offering more predictable schedules or honoring day one rights now, employees will know that we are serious about their well-being.
Okay, great points. Firstly, Sarah's going to try and work on getting her mic volume up a little bit, so hopefully we'll sort that out soon. But right, so early action not only avoids last-minute scrambles, but also actively improves safety and trust in the workplace, which can start right now, which I think is smart advice. Let's jump in. Let's do our first poll to gauge everyone's current level of preparedness for these changes. Okay, so you should be seeing a poll pop up anytime now. And the question is, how would you characterize your organization's current preparedness for the employment rights bill changes affecting health and safety? So your options, as you should be able to see, are we're already well underway, we're aware of the changes, but we haven't started significant preparations yet, not really aware or prepared, because this is all a bit new, not sure, not applicable. Well, I think if you're at the webinar, then you must at least be a little bit aware, because I feel like everyone here is at least getting something underway by coming here and listening to us and learning a little bit about it today. So I'm gonna give everyone another couple of seconds to vote. I think we're done voting. Okay, so the votes look like well, some people say that that's not sure, not applicable. Fair enough. We have 11% of people doing that. Not aware, not really aware or prepared. This is mostly new. 16%, 56%. So people here are aware, but they haven't done any significant preparations yet. And 16% are already well underway, updating policies and systems in advance. So, guys, what do we think of these results?
Well, I think that lines up with what I'd expect. It's easy to pull off since 2026. It's easy to put it off. I mean, since 2026 does sound far away, but hopefully today will spur everyone, especially those who haven't started, to begin preparing. And attending this webinar is a great place to start.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree. And having half of the participants aware of the changes, I think is pretty positive. I think it tends to be that the larger companies often have teams that are tracking the bill and starting to prepare and drafting plans, and smaller companies tend to wait a little bit longer. But the good news is everyone's here right after this webinar. You're in a much better position to start planning so that when the changes hit, you'll be ready.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So let's look at some specific changes and discuss what they mean in practice. So we'll begin with 0-hour contracts and guaranteed hours, since that is a major shift in how businesses manage staffing. Naomi, can you break down how that will work under the new bill and what implications that might have for health and safety?
Absolutely. It's a great question. So what's going to happen is after a reference period, which will likely be around 12 weeks, if a worker on a 0-hour or very low hour contract has consistently been working more hours than their contract guarantees, the employer will be required to offer them a contract with guaranteed hours reflecting that actual average. So in practice, this means employers must closely track the hours of anyone on a 0-hour arrangement. If someone has a contract that says 0 hours guaranteed, but in reality, they worked, say, 20 hours a week for the last few months, the employer will need to formally offer them a contract that guarantees around 20 hours per week going forward. The worker does not have to accept it, but the employer has to offer it. And if you don't, then they could have grounds for a tribunal claim, which no one wants.
Right. Wow, that sounds like it might require quite a bit of quite a bit of preparation to manage all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Your employers are going to need systems to monitor hours, to flag when someone qualifies for a guaranteed hours offer. It's not something that you're going to want to do manually with spreadsheets if you can avoid it, because it is so easy to miss someone, to miss the hours. Look, there is a positive side. If more workers move onto guaranteed hours, you'll get a more stable schedule. You can plan shifts knowing you have certain people contracted to be available. So theoretically, that can improve safety because you're less likely to be caught understaffed at the last minute. On the flip side, employers will lose some flexibility. Like, for example, and this has been a big issue, the seasonal peaks. Companies that have more seasonal hours when they're busier, when they're not busy. So in the old system, they would just hire a bunch of 0 hour staff for the busy period and then just stop giving them shifts after. So now, if during the peak, these employees worked regularly enough to qualify for guaranteed hours, you're going to have to offer them those hours even when things slow down. So companies will need to plan for that. And just so you know, the legislators are very aware that this affects very heavily seasonal companies with seasonal ups and downs. So there are ways that you can deal with that. They can offer short fixed term contracts for truly short term needs, or companies can be very, very upfront where work is genuinely temporary, but it has to be genuinely temporary, and that those hours then might be able to be reduced later.
Okay, right. I mean, it's very interesting. I think we're going to have to see exactly how these things are worded and how they are implemented because it seems like there's still a little bit of gray area here. But thank you for that. So what about the provision for giving notice for cancelled shifts? Because if that's not managed properly, that could also end up being quite expensive, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's very right. So the bill includes rules about giving reasonable advance notice for work schedules and compensating workers if you cancel their shift at short notice, like we said. So from a health and safety perspective, that encourages better planning. You can't just call someone 2 hours before a shift unless it's an emergency, and you can't cancel someone's shift last minute without possibly paying them for it. That means managers will have to think ahead more, which likely results in more stable staffing for each shift. And stable staffing levels are generally safer. And one more thing, workers with more predictable hours are generally less stressed and less tired from juggling an unpredictable schedule. So that can also mean more alert, focused employees that are on the job, which is always good for safety.
Okay, so it seems like the bottom line is that we should track those hours and be ready to adjust contracts. It sounds like health and safety teams will need to collaborate closely with HR and operations on scheduling to ensure that you meet these requirements without inadvertently creating safety gaps, like accidentally ending up short-staffed because you didn't schedule enough people due to the new rules.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. If you haven't done so already, you should invest in a good time tracking and scheduling system. That will help you stay compliant by flagging when guaranteed hours must be offered and then maintaining safe staffing levels. And yes, H&S managers should be part of the conversation on scheduling changes. We often know, for example, which shifts or roles cannot be left unfilled without risking safety. So when HR is figuring out how to implement these new rules, input from the health and safety managers is really important.
Okay, so all right, so another major change is around day one rights for sick leave and other leave. Sarah, how significant is this shift and what should health and safety folk consider now that employees will have these rights from the moment that they start working?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is really a huge shift in terms of employee rights. Under the current system, statutory sick pay or SSP only kicks in on the fourth consecutive sick day, as the first 3 days are unpaid waiting days, and employees have to earn above a certain threshold to qualify at all. Now, also things like paternity or paternal leave often require the employee to have been with the company for a certain number of months to qualify for that. But this bill is going to change all of that. If an employee is sick and cannot work, they'll be entitled to SSP from day one of their illness, so no waiting days. And the lower earnings limit is being removed or at least lowered, so even low earners will be eligible, will qualify for SSP, and possibly at a proportionate rate. We'll need to wait for further guidance on that one to know for sure, but essentially it means that basically everyone who's employed and gets sick will be paid SSP for those days from the start. Now, similarly, entitlements like maternity, paternity, adoption, and bereavement leave will be accessible immediately. There won't be a requirement like, for example, as we've had in the past, must have 26 weeks of service for paternity, for example.
Okay, so generally, and specifically for health and safety managers, what can that mean for them?
Well, I think we'll want to do more to encourage sick employees to stay home. One of the hardest things pre-pandemic was convincing sick employees, especially those early on in a job or on low pay, to stay home when they were ill because they worried about not getting paid or getting in trouble. Now, if someone wakes up on day 2 of their job with a fever, they will actually get paid SSP. So they'll have less incentive to come in sick. And that means, first of all, less risk of them spreading illness to others, and also less risk of them having, let's say, an accident at work because they felt awful but dragged themselves in anyway. So I think it really is going to promote a healthier workplace all around. But this also means even your newest employees might be taking time off, and you need to be prepared for that. With no qualifying period, even someone in their first week will now have the right to call in sick or take emergency bereavement leave. And organizations will need to have backup plans for all roles from day one.
Okay, so what steps would you recommend to help prepare for that?
Good question. So I'd say we should brief our line managers that all these leave rights will be immediate. I can imagine an old school supervisor saying something like, "You're still on probation, you can't take a sick day." That attitude has to be nipped in the bud. If a manager denies a day one right, the company could find themselves on the wrong end of an investigation by the Fair Work Agency or even an employment tribunal. And of course, it will damage trust. So part of our preparation is going to be updating policies and training managers. So any new hire has the same basic sick leave and emergency leave rights as someone who's been here years, and everyone across the board has to be aware of that. And when onboarding new employees, tell them about these rights and responsibilities. Let them know as well, if you're ill, please stay home. You will be paid SSP from day one, and here's how to notify us. And that will set a tone of care for their health and safety from the start.
Those are some good advice, good considerations. Personally, I'm curious to know how the system is going to be robust enough so that it's not exploited. But in summary, I think the advice is to update your absence policies and procedures now. Plan for coverage, even for brand new staff, and especially make sure everyone knows about these day one rights and supports them. But I think you're right when you say that ultimately it is going to make the workplace healthier. Okay, let's do another poll. Let's do a poll about how you might be communicating these changes to your workforce. So the question is, are you planning to conduct training to communicate these new rights? Your options are yes, we are preparing new training internally. Yes, we are preparing training from an external provider. The third option is we're considering it. The fourth option is no plan to do so. And the fifth option is that you're not sure. Okay, so we have a couple of seconds just for everyone to fill that in. Quite curious to know what everyone's going to say about this. I think this is important. because if we don't communicate this to the staff, it's going to lead to confusion. So it's definitely something that needs to be prepared for. Let's have a look at the results. Okay, so the results are preparing new training internally, 25%, external training, 3%. We're considering it, 38%, no plan to do so, 10%, and not sure, 23%. Some interesting results. Sarah Hannah, what do you think the key steps that we should be taking are here?
Yeah, so a lot of us will be updating policies, and that is important, but is only part of the picture. So that should be kept in mind. Policies, and particularly policy changes, should be backed up by training so staff actually understand their rights and responsibilities. Without that, even the best written policies can just go unnoticed. So whether you do it at onboarding or periodically throughout the employee life cycle, training should always be part of your communications plan.
That's great advice. I just saw someone mention in the chat here that they're worried that there's the potential for people to sort of exploit this, and how we're gonna prevent that. And I think the answer is nobody really knows. But I think the advice is here that if preparing now will soften the impact of these changes when it arrives. If you build up a culture of honesty and of trust, then hopefully these things won't come as such a big surprise when this legislation gets implemented. Okay, so moving on. Now, there's another crucial element of this bill, which is all about whistleblowing and speaking up. A strong safety culture definitely depends on employees feeling safe to voice concerns, whether it's about something as simple as a slippery floor or something more serious, like a piece of equipment that's malfunctioning, or even misconduct like harassment. So the bill enhances protections for people who speak up. Naomi, what's changing on that front, and what should companies be doing to foster a speak up culture?
Yeah, it's a great question because that's exactly right. The bill reinforces and broadens whistleblower protections. So in the UK, we already have laws that protect workers from being dismissed or penalized for making a protected disclosure. So this bill is likely to expand those protections, possibly making it easier for workers to claim if they're mistreated for speaking up, and emphasizing areas like harassment as issues people should report. It might also set up new bodies or procedures. There's talk of a whistleblowing office or a hotline at the government level, but nothing is settled yet. Nothing's concrete.
Okay, so what practical steps can we start taking now?
Great, really great question. So every company should have a known confidential way for employees to report concerns. This could be a dedicated email, a phone hotline, a third-party system, even just kind of an open door policy, but it has to be communicated. If nobody knows it exists, it doesn't help. During training or onboarding, tell employees, if you see something dangerous or unethical, here's exactly how you can report it. So also, when it comes to retaliation of these whistleblowers, it's one thing to say, oh, we won't retaliate, but you have to actually enforce that. So your managers must understand that if an employee raises a concern, you do not punish them, no matter if it's about safe or reporting the manager themselves for something. The bill could possibly impose harsher consequences on employers who do retaliate. So this is really, really a critical point. And from a culture perspective, if people suspect they'll get in trouble for speaking up, they just won't do it. Then the problems fester and grow. So you need to make non-retaliation a really core part of your policy and actually live up to it. So beyond having this kind of mechanism, companies need to encourage the use. So talk in safety meetings about the importance of reporting near misses or hazards. When someone does report something, thank them. And that's, of course, assuming that this reporting was raised in good faith, which is what we're assuming here. And let them know what's being done as a result of their reporting. Some companies even give positive recognition to employees who identify issues. You have to gauge what's appropriate, but the idea is to remove the fear and even possibly create some pride in contributing to a safer workplace.
Right. So, okay, I hear what you're saying. So, there's a big part of it is understanding how to report. But I think equally as important is to make sure that the reports are followed up on, because if there's a sense of them just being sort of tossed into the void, eventually people will feel like there's little point.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I'm saying. And that's a great way to say it and great point. So I'm going to also add that you need to train your managers on how to handle a report. If an employee comes to a supervisor and says, I want to report something unsafe, the worst responses would be dismissing it or even getting angry at the person. We need to train supervisors to respond with something like, oh, thank you for telling me. I'm going to make sure that this is looked into, and then actually follow the proper process. Also, need to consider those situations where someone might be more comfortable talking to a peer or a designated person first. For example, many companies have mental health first aiders or champions. So if one of those champions hears about an issue, like let's say an employee tells a mental health first aider, my manager is bullying me, it's making me really stressed. That champion should encourage the person to report it or ask if they can assist in raising it rather than keeping it quiet. Of course, all this needs to be handled very sensitively, but the point is to get the concern to the people who can actually deal with it. Silence is exactly what we don't want.
Right, absolutely. So the goal is that any genuine concern, whether it's a safety hazard, illegal activity, harassment, whatever, it gets voiced, it gets dealt with internally, rather than being swept under the rug or escalated outside the organization because someone or people have lost trust. And with stronger legal protections, it's definitely an opportunity to reinforce that culture. If you're interested in finding more about how Vinci Works' own whistleblowing system and the kind of features it offers, you can download the brochure using the link that's coming up in the chat now, I believe. So yeah, definitely get on that if you're interested in learning more. Okay, so we've talked a lot about having channels for people to raise concerns. Let's do another quick poll on this one. So the question which should be coming up is, how confident are you about your organization's whistleblowing procedures? One, very confident. Two, somewhat confident. Not very confident at all. Not very confident. Not confident at all. Or not sure. So again, that question is, how confident are you about your organization's whistleblowing procedures? Perhaps some people here are the people that are putting the whistleblowing procedures into place. And maybe we'll see that reflected in the results. Give me a couple of seconds. And the results are in. 40% of the people are very confident. Maybe some of those people, as we said, are the people putting them in place. Maybe not. Some are confident, 38%, 13% not very confident, 4% not confident at all, 5% not sure. Well, I mean, I think at least the results have disappeared, but at least I think it's skewed. They're back. At least most people are confident or somewhat confident in the whistleblowing procedures, because, like as we said, it is a very important topic, and so hopefully that's a pretty typical spread. A lot of organizations do have hotlines or reporting systems on paper, but the real issue is whether employees know about it and also trust it. So if you have a low usage of your system, that could either mean that because everything's perfect, which is unlikely but possible, or that people are too afraid or don't think that it'll help. So it's worth checking the awareness and trust levels within your organizations, maybe through an anonymous survey or by looking at whether issues tend to be raised through other channels, like either whisper to HR rather than formally logged. So for those without formal mechanism, I strongly recommend creating one. It can be simple, even just a dedicated email address or physical Dropbox, though ideally something that allows anonymity if needed is recommended. And then communicate it, train people up, make it clear that raising concerns is encouraged and safe, especially with the new bill's emphasis. Not having any channel at all could really backfire if something serious happens and it turns out that employees felt they had no way to report it internally.
Dave, those are great points. I just want to add that it's really a good idea to extend that to everyone who works for you, including contractors or even temps, because they might see issues also. Whistleblower protections should also be covering them. And we should also make sure, our employers should make sure that any worker on site knows how to speak up if they see a safety issue or some misconduct. It really helps everyone in the end if the issue gets flagged and fixed.
Right. Okay. So this is all about creating an environment where no one hesitates to say, "Hey, this isn't right," whether it's safety risk, or we said, or anything else that could harm people or the organization. So I'm going to throw in a shameless plug. If you're interested in VinciWorks' own whistleblowing training, you can write whistle into the chat, and you'll get more information about that. Okay, so now let's touch on something you mentioned briefly before: the workplace surveillance and the right to disconnect. So these issues that you mentioned earlier, Naomi, and they are more in the sort of consultation phase, so as we understand them, but they signal the direction things are heading. So Naomi, what should employers be considering regarding after-hours communication and the monitoring of employees?
Yeah, this is something a lot of employees are going to be very, very interested in. And like you said, the bill itself doesn't really set hard rules on these issues yet. Kind of more signals that the government intends to act on them, likely through future regulations. But I think companies would really be smart to get ahead of this curve. And firstly, is this right to disconnect. And this concept is actually already in law in some countries, and it's about protecting employees' personal time. So even without a law, it's something that employees are starting to expect. Companies can start by establishing some guidelines. For example, discourage emails or work calls outside of normal hours, or at least make it clear to your employees that they aren't expected to reply until they're back at work. Some companies even go so far as to set server rules that stop emails from sending at midnight or whatever time they want. So you don't necessarily have to go that far, but culturally, managers could lead by example by not pinging their team after midnight or when they know it's their day off. And especially, everyone here is involved in health and safety. And we know that fatigue is a real risk. And if people can truly, truly connect after work, they'll just come back much more refreshed, much more alert, much able to do their job better.
Yeah, those are such great points, Naomi. And I just wanted to add that from a safety standpoint, I love the idea of the right to disconnect. Burnout and fatigue are real safety hazards also. If people feel they can truly shut off after work, their mental health is going to improve and they're less likely to make mistakes when they are working. So even before it becomes law, we as health and safety professionals can champion downtime. Now, doing simple things like encouraging people to take their full holiday entitlement and then to not contact them when they're off unless it's an emergency, that can really go a long way.
Yeah, I think it's especially true for international teams and teams working in different countries where there's different holidays and cultural expectations around when emails or messages might be sent or answered, and communicating those kind of things will be really important. So I think you guys made some interesting and important points there, things that I think everyone can really get behind, because I think we all can suffer sometimes from being too attached and too connected to our workplaces. Okay, so we mentioned surveillance. So that's going to be another big change, is about the surveillance of employees. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and it's kind of creepy, but with all this remote work and advanced technology, some employees have implemented really pretty invasive stuff, like tracking keystrokes or webcam monitoring. And obviously, there's a balance. Some monitoring is fine or even necessary, like CCTV in a warehouse for security, or GPS in a company vehicle for safety when they're driving. But anything that a company does, they should be transparent about, and they need to really ensure that it's justified. Like if you're monitoring emails or internet use, have a policy that explains it, explains why you're doing and what you're doing. We're moving towards more restrictions on employee surveillance from the government. And as health and safety professionals, like everyone here, one interesting angle is this safety versus privacy. For instance, using cameras or wearable technology to ensure safety in a lone working scenario could be really, really helpful. But then the company has to communicate why they're doing it so it's not seen as surveillance.
Right. I think that also necessitates some serious thinking around data protection, especially if you're using something like a smartwatch, which could incorporate your neuro data or some other sensitive types of information.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. That's a really important point to take forward. Remember that any personal data from monitoring is subject to GDPR and data protection rules. The bill's future regulations will align with that, but it's worth auditing your practices now. That would include listing out what monitoring you do, like CCTV or system logs, and check that it is all necessary and that you've told employees about it. If something seems overly intrusive with little benefit, then consider dialing it back. The government has hinted at requiring consultation with staff or unions about surveillance tech. It's good practice to do that anyway. If you plan to introduce, say, for example, vehicle dash cams or location trackers for safety reasons, then you want to just first talk to employees or their representatives, explain the safety benefits, and listen to their concerns. Often you can find a solution that achieves safety and respects privacy. Like maybe, for example, you'll have the tracker only triggered, that the tracker will only trigger an alert if speeding rather than having a constant location broadcast.
Yeah, that makes good sense. I would say also if you wanted to get caught up, if you're not already on GDPR or some of these other cyber issues, definitely just type demo in the chat and we'll have people contact you, and then you can look at some of our courses and solutions about GDPR and cybersecurity. Okay, so let's have another poll. Let's see what our plans are regarding after hours contact. So the question is, are you planning to conduct training on the right to disconnect? This is quite new, so I don't know how much people will have already planned for this, but the options are yes, we're preparing some new training internally. Yes, from our external training provider is the second option. And then the third option is we're considering it. The fourth, no plans to do so. And the fifth is a shrug of I'm not sure. Okay, so a couple of minutes, couple of seconds. Again, the question is about training for the right to disconnect. And we're going to see the results, hopefully, for a bit longer. Okay, so 10% have already thought about this. They're preparing for some new training internally. And this is what I would expect, just because it is quite new. It's quite a new concept. We are considering it gets 44% and no plans to do so. Hopefully the word there is yet. No plans to do so yet is 46%, but maybe that will change in the future. Okay, so let's move on. How would we start to roll out a communications plan on the right to disconnect?
Okay, thanks, Dave. Yeah, so I think a simple email from leadership saying we encourage you to unplug outside work hours, and managers should avoid non-urgent out of hours communication. Doing something as simple as that can set the tone. If you have no policy, now is a good time to think about it. And if you do already have one, you should ensure that it is actually being followed and that people understand it, which is where training would come in. Even including a short module about it during onboarding training or sending out reminders can help encourage adoption. I've seen companies that have no formal policy, but when the managers lead by example and never bother people on weekends, employees are going to feel better about switching off. And on the other hand, I've seen companies that do have a policy on paper, but certain departments have ignored it. So it really comes down to the culture. And as health and safety practitioners, we can advocate for these practices because we know the health impact. Perhaps we can even gather some data like a stress survey or fatigue reports to show leadership why disconnecting improves safety and performance.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. I think this, more than in maybe any other topic we've discussed today, this is something where company culture really can dictate so much of what happens in the workplace. Anyway, we've covered a lot of ground already today. Before we go to the audience Q&A, I'm cognizant of the time, but I did want to touch on one more piece, which is the enforcement and the role of the new Fair Work Agency and how technology can help us with so many record-keeping requirements. So the Fair Work Agency, as Naomi described earlier, will have powers to inspect records, enforce holiday and sick pay, and that underscores the importance of documentation. And this is, I think, where technology can come in as a huge help. So, Naomi, what are your thoughts on leveraging technology for compliance with these new requirements?
So I think you're kind of going to anticipate my answer, but the right tools can make a really, really big difference. Think about all the new things to track: hours for guaranteed hour offers, sick leave from day one, holiday pay calculations, because the bill also introduces a requirement to keep records of holiday pay for 6 years. Doing this manually is just going to lead to likely a lot of human error. Technology can really shoulder a lot of that burden. And a good HR or payroll system can automatically track employee hours and flag when someone's average hours exceed their contract. It can also handle what we were discussing, that day one sick pay, ensuring that even if someone has no tenure, if they're marked sick, SSP is calculated. And it can enforce that all leave types are available from day one. Really, really hard for someone to do manually. And modern scheduling apps also can give effective notice for shifts. So many will prevent you from publishing a rota without like certain lead times, but they can keep a log of any changes, which is really, really, really useful if you ever need to show inspectors that you paid compensation for a canceled shift, for example.
Right, and with so many changes, we'll likely be updating training, whether it's a module on the new whistleblowing policy or refreshed health and safety training to cover new procedures. So stand by for that.
That really, really is true. And that's why it's so important to have a great LMS, a learning module system, which can deploy these courses and track completion. Plus, if the Fair Work Agency asks, have you trained all your managers on the new sick leave policy? You can just easily and simply pull a report. Employees are also going to want to consider an online whistleblowing platform. And there are solutions where employees can report issues anonymously, and then you can manage the case all the way through to resolution. And not only does this encourage reporting, but it also provides a documented paper trail that you address these concerns, which is so important if you ever need to demonstrate that to regulators or in court. And don't forget that the Fair Work Agency is going to expect these comprehensive records. A lot of HR systems allow you to generate reports or even set alerts if something's missing. For example, you can set an alert if any employee doesn't have documented working hours record, or if holiday pay hasn't logged correctly. Considering the bill will require keeping holiday pay records for 6 years, as I mentioned, and failing to do so could be a criminal offense with unlimited fines, having a digital system to store these records is so important.
Yeah, thank you, Naomi. Such important things to keep in mind. And I'll also just add that since many of these changes tie into well-being, using your health and safety incident management software to also track things like near misses or stress-related reports can help identify if any changes are negatively impacting safety. So, for example, if after a shift pattern change, you see a spike in incident reports on the late shift, your system can flag that trend. One of the best things about tech is automated reminders. For example, if someone's been off sick for 7 days and maybe needs to provide a doctor's note now, the system can remind both the employee and HR. If a 0-hour worker hits week 12, it could trigger a task for HR to prepare a contract offer. Automation can just help ensure that nothing slips through the cracks.
Right. I think leveraging tech in this situation especially can be very important. But also, we're expecting quite a significant change when it comes to enforcement. So previously, much of this wasn't proactively monitored, but I think that's set to change, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what companies really have to get ready for. The new Fair Work Agency will have the power to just show up and ask for records. They can issue fines up to 200% of any underpayments they find, and they can even recoup their investigation costs from employers. So I think that there's a pretty strong incentive for companies to have their ducks in a row. And not to go over this again, but technology can really provide that kind of single source of truth where with just a few clicks you can retrieve the evidence of compliance, whether it's timesheets or pay records or training logs or anything you need to demonstrate what you did.
Yeah, such great points. And I'll just add one more thing about technology. Using technology can also improve transparency with employees. For example, some companies let employees access their own data, like how many hours they've worked in the last 3 months, for example, or how their holiday pay was calculated. And when people can see that, they trust the system more and there are fewer disputes. And also tech can free up our time. Instead of chasing paperwork, we can focus on the more human side, like training, like support, and continuous improvement of our safety practices.
Okay, great points. The right tech support definitely keeps you from falling foul of these complex requirements. So, another shameless plug. If you would like any more information about our own LMS at VinciWorks, you can write LMS into the chat now. Again, write demo in the chat if you want to have a bit more information about some of our courses. And also just make sure that you check out our comprehensive guide to the best compliance technology available right now in our guide. I think in the chat there will be a link which is coming up. Okay, we have 5.5 minutes left. So let's move to a couple of questions that we've had from the audience. Let's try and answer a couple live, and we'll try and if you send in a question, we don't get to it, then hopefully we'll be able to send something in, follow up with you a little bit later on. Okay, so one question we've had a few times phrased slightly differently is when are these changes actually going to take effect? So what do we know about that?
Yeah, it's an important question. So the Employment Rights Bill is still actually being debated in Parliament, which means the changes are not final. So the legislation has to be passed by both houses of Parliament. But since the government has a massive majority, and this is one of their flagship policies, we really aren't anticipating that there'll be too much significant change to what there is now. And I think it'll likely pass before the summer recess, and most changes are expected to come into force in 2026. And likely those changes will be staggered as they come online throughout that year. We might see exact dates once the bill is finalized, and some things could even start late 2025, but I think the bulk of what will be started will be in 2026. But like we said before, don't wait till 2026 to act. There's a lot of lead time that everyone here can use to prepare, and I think this webinar is a great start to that.
Yeah, hopefully we've given you guys some things to get to sort of inspire your thoughts and to get thinking about. And again, do be in contact with us. We are here to help as much as we can about many of the things that we've mentioned. Okay, I see our next question is what should be our top priority to tackle first among all these changes? Sarah, you want to take this one?
Sure. So naturally, it's going to probably differ slightly by organization, but I'd say the first priority is to get your compliance house in order. And by that, I mean to do an internal checkup against the bill's provisions. So you want to ask yourself questions like, are we tracking working hours accurately for all staff? And if not, fix that first. Then you might ask, then you want to ask, let's say, do you have a system to keep the required records like holiday pay calculations for the long term? Then another question that will be important to ask is, what about our current policies? Do contracts mention 2-year service requirements that will no longer apply? And if that's the case, then you need to start updating those. So basically, what we want to do is go over your current policies, find the gaps between your current practice and the upcoming law. Once you identify the gaps, you can prioritize filling them in. And the second priority, I'd say, is communication and training. So you want to make sure leadership is aware of what's coming because senior buy-in is really crucial. Some of these changes might require budget, for instance, new software, or potentially higher sick leave costs. And you want to start educating your wider workforce. Managers need to know, as we've said, how to handle these new rights, and employees should also know their rights, as we've also mentioned. So, in short, I'd say assess and educate. Assess your current state versus future requirements and educate everyone involved on what's changing. And if you do those two things, I think you'll be well on your way to very smooth implementation.
Right. I think you're right. I think it definitely depends what you've got in place, exactly what which one of these new legislations is going to impact your company specifically. So I think the answer definitely varies between company to company. Okay, I think we're going to wrap up. It's been great having you guys on. I really want to thank our panelists Sarah, Hannah, and Naomi for sharing so much expertise today. I've learned a lot. I had a bit of information beforehand. You guys have really brought your A game, and it's been super enlightening. I definitely want to thank everyone else who's come, all our attendees. We love putting these things together, but we don't like doing it just to ourselves. So it's great to be able to share it with you, and especially for participating so actively with the polls and the questions. Thank you from the whole VinciWorks team. And until next time, goodbye.